Hi, everybody. My name is Callie Lakacher. I am a graduate assistant in Student Life and Leadership's Commuter Life. For today's Mentoring and Success Coaching in the Virtual Environment training, we will be talking about building boundaries with ourselves and with others in the mentoring role. Today, we are going to talk about first creating boundaries with our mentees. And so we will discuss initial boundary conversations and appropriate language, settings, and topics. Next, we will talk about creating boundaries with ourselves. So, you know yourself better than anyone. Your boundaries are just that, yours. We will discuss why your personal boundaries are important as a mentor. We'll then talk about professional versus personal boundaries and how we all wear different hats throughout our day, our careers, and our lives as a whole. But as a mentor, it is necessary to understand what those are for yourself and how to utilize them in your role. And lastly, start strong because things can change. Boundaries are changeable. But if they are set too late, they might be harder for mentees to follow later on. So learning objectives for today are as follows. Number one, this module will focus on encouraging mentors to understand what boundaries look like in a mentoring role and how to set them. Number two, mentors will understand how boundaries positively impact a successful mentee-mentor relationship. Number three, mentors will understand the importance of boundaries within their relationships with themselves. And lastly, number four, we will discuss how boundaries play a role professionally, conversationally, personally, and emotionally in a mentee-mentor relationship. So starting off with discussing boundaries with your mentee. The first topic we're going to talk about is coming prepared. You should be coming to your first meeting with your boundaries already decided. So this is time for you to sit down and write them or create a form that lays out what you are expecting of yourself in the mentoring role, what your mentee should expect from you, and really what you're expecting of your mentees. This conversation will require you to think about how available you want to be to your mentee. Do you want them texting it at 2 a.m., calling you in the middle of your classes? So these boundaries are important in creating a foundation of what is acceptable from both parties. A key topic here is really to set them early on. So it's okay in the beginning of your mentee-mentor relationship to be a little bit on the stern side while not being cold or harsh. Just a detailed conversation of what you're expecting of your mentees and what they can expect from you. Secondly, we're going to talk about language. So being a mentor is a professional role, and your language should reflect just that. This is referencing you being conscious of who's around you and what you're saying. What you say as a mentor can really stick with a mentee, so just realize that responsibility when you are talking to them. You can practice a sense of authenticity and be your genuine self while still being aware of the words that you choose to use. Just because your mentee may be using a certain style of language doesn't mean that you have to fully match that language. So you can be yourself, just be aware of the position you're holding in the space that you're in. And lastly, to really avoid generalization, assuming, or grouping, our language really matters. And like I said, your mentee really will be looking towards you for kind of a sense of guidance. So if you're laying out the groundwork that may unconsciously include inappropriate language or generalizations or grouping people together in a negative context, they can pick up on that and possibly even mimic it. Number three here, talking about setting, and we are going to talk about it in a virtual stance, given that we are going virtual in the fall. Sorry, there was a car horn. So given that we are going virtual in the fall, the desired setting for virtual mentoring is professional or semi-professional. This means preferably sitting up with appropriate clothing and in a space where you are present with your mentee. Treat virtual mentoring as if you are meeting with them in person. That's the same kind of presentation that you should be showing up in. What we mean by that is being aware of your background. Say you're on a Zoom call and it's just really noisy or loud inside or outside the place you're calling from. That might be a time to say, I'm sorry, I actually can't escape the noise at this time. Is there any time that maybe we can reschedule? Just because that can be really distracting for both you and the mentee, especially if there's sensitive content being covered. Other points to make, avoid PJs and really commit to that semi-professional attire. Try not to be laying down on your bed or your couch. It gives a sense of leisureness that may make the mentee feel like you don't particularly feel interested in the conversation, and really just avoiding any other elements that you would if you were meeting in person. Try not to be on your phone, try to limit intense snacking or full meals, and really save those for another time. And then lastly, the content being covered. So although a mentor is a trusted supporter of a mentee, there may be topics that you as a mentor are just not comfortable with, and that is a boundary that you are allowed to set. If there's ever something that comes up with a mentee where you're sharing content that is maybe over personal or just a topic that you're highly uncomfortable talking about, you can let them know and let them know you're still there to support them, but you may not be the best person to be having that conversation with. Just be honest with what you want to have conversations around and what you don't feel comfortable with, because that can really begin to shift throughout your time together and you can reevaluate it later on. All right, so now we're going to talk about boundaries with oneself. First, personal and emotional boundaries. If you do choose to share only what you're comfortable with. Your role is really to listen and support a mentee, so don't ever feel pressured to share unless you want to. Sometimes we feel just because somebody else is sharing, we have to share personal information too, but that's really not the case as a mentor. If they ask you a personal question and you feel comfortable, then go right ahead and answer it. And if not, you can just say, oh, this time is really for you, and I think that's what we should focus on for now. If you're somebody who likes to share, make sure you are practicing sharing the mic. Some people have a really easy time connecting to others by telling stories about themselves, but just remember that 60-40 idea where the mentee should be talking a majority of the time. And if you notice that you have been taking a lot of space, maybe just reallocate that time back to the mentee. So let's talk about availability. When meeting with mentees, are you physically in a place where you can be fully present? We talked about this with those boundaries around surroundings and checking in with yourself if the space itself is distracting. And if the answer is yes to that, that's probably not a good time to be having a meeting. Are you also emotionally in a place where you can listen to somebody else and take on somebody else's pain or concerns? I talked about this as, are you empathetically full at the time? For example, if you're in a situation in your personal life, maybe it's been kind of a hard couple days, or maybe you've experienced a loss, or you're just in a space where you feel the need for your own self-reflection and personal space, that's not the best time to try to be emotionally there for somebody else, because your heart might be a little full at that time. So just pay attention to your needs as well as you are to the mentees. Do you need a break? Have you been mentoring a lot recently? Are your emotions, they just seem kind of heavy and you feel as though you can't particularly give the best advice or give the best care at that time? That's okay. And it's something that you need to be able to feel confident in as a mentor, being able to discuss with your mentees and let them know that unfortunately right now, I think it's not the best time to meet. I want to make sure that I'm fully present here with you when we do meet, and I'm not in that space to do so today. This is really talking about transparency. So if you aren't able to show up physically or emotionally, be honest with the person on the other end. Really let them know, hey, I'm not going to be there today because of blank, and that blank should be honesty. We expect honesty from our mentees, and they should expect the same thing from their mentor. And lastly, here, the art of saying no. I want to start by addressing saying no is hard. And something that I've seen over and over again is that people who decide to be a mentor are people who are very caring and who want to give back to others and share their experiences to make another person's experiences easier. And sometimes when we care so much about other people, it can be very overloading as a mentor. It's important in these situations to learn how to say no, because saying no can be a great superpower when we utilize it in the right way in order to benefit both ourselves and our mentees. All right, so we're just going to talk a little bit about professional boundaries and go over some good examples and not so good examples. We're talking about professional boundaries because as a mentor, these are all good examples of elements you may eventually bring into your practice. Starting with a good example, if you are assisting your mentee with some resume building. In this situation, you'd be giving tips and notes on the current resume to help them look at maybe rewording or some possible changes. If you are not someone with resume building experience, this would be a great opportunity to refer them to career services or a resume workshop. What would not be a good example of this is fixing it for them or completing their work. This could be seen as a mentor saying, oh, you can just send it to me and I'll make some edits and send it back. That's not preferably what we're looking for in mentorship, because you're supposed to be guiding them to learn how to make those corrections on their own. Moving on here, a good example of interview practices could be setting up a mock interview with them over Zoom or a phone call where they had given you the questions ahead of time. This is where you can give helpful and supportive comments and feedback at the end, or maybe suggest areas where they could elaborate more or include an example, while also reminding them that you are not an expert in interviewing, but just helping them practice. What would not be so great is giving false information when answering a question you don't know the answer to. And if you're helping them prep for an interview, saying something along the lines of, I think you should say this because I think this is what they're looking for. This is not a very safe statement to say as a mentor, because you don't actually know what the place of employment might be looking for. So we want to make sure not to give any false information out to mentees. Another good example is talking about professional etiquette. This could be including finding existing resources and workshops on professional etiquette to share and maybe helping them practice. So you could say, oh, here's a great workshop happening at SDSU or in your local area that I found, and here's a free Zoom link. And then you can come back together and talk about what was learned and how they hope to use their new skills. What's not a good example is telling them exactly what to do or say. Saying something negative about the way they sound or the language that they're using. We want to be really careful if you're ever addressing the way somebody sounds or the language that they're using, because this could actually be coming out as a microaggression and you may not even know it. So if you're talking about the way somebody's speaking and their language sounds a little bit different than yours, and their tone or the way they're pronouncing their words, and you say, oh, it sounds like you're not saying it right, this can actually be taken as a microaggression because you may be making a comment on someone's dialect that is connected to their culture or upbringing. It's always an important reminder that just because somebody doesn't speak the way that you're speaking doesn't mean it's wrong in any way. These acts are more than likely completely unconscious, but when we're a mentor, we just want to avoid anything that can make your mentee feel uncomfortable or less than. So let's now touch on setting and shifting the boundaries we create and how this process is really up to you and your mentees. I touched on the topic of starting strong with our boundaries and having them pre-decided and really being confident in them in the first meeting. This is not only about the mentor, this is about the mentee as well. This is definitely a partnership, so make sure you know where they stand and what they're comfortable with too. I really encourage taking notes and having a physical memory of the boundaries that were set between you and your mentee, and really just listen to those requests and take it seriously, because just as much as you want them to follow your boundaries, you should be following theirs as well. This is definitely the time to let them aid in creating the space that you'll grow in together, which will give them a sense of control and comfortability within the relationship. Moving into reevaluating our boundaries, as time goes on, reassess the boundaries you started with. Are they still in place? Are they necessary anymore? Are they slowing progress between you and your mentee? Have you or your mentee changed your mind on some of the boundaries? Find out what's been working well and what can be improved. And then from that point, you can make changes if necessary. This is where you can both talk about whatever is going to best support you and your mentees. This is your opportunity to find out what has been working well and what areas can be readdressed to make the relationship more successful. And lastly, make those changes if necessary. It's okay if either of you have changed your mind and want to put in place more or less boundaries. That's really what these conversations are for. To conclude today's training, boundaries are a constant and ongoing conversation that need to be applied across all areas of your life. They are consensual, changeable, and adaptive. Remind, reassess, and remain confident in your boundaries. We really do use boundaries every single day, and it's important to sit and reflect on them whenever you get an opportunity to. And don't ever feel bad for talking about your boundaries or saying your boundaries have been crossed. Have these conversations together, because it really is a two-way street. That's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much.